Psychedelics are not a substitute for faith. They are a door to authentic faith, born of encountering directly the sacred dimension of everyday experience. This is not the only gate to that discovery, but it is the most ancient and universal and potentially the most accessible to the majority of the human race. This is a quote that really grabbed my attention from our next guest, our next disruptor in Disrupt Everything podcast series, Rick Doblin. Rick, welcome and thank you.
Yes, thank you for having me. I really like that quote.
That's if I recall well, is from your book from Manifesting Minds.
Yes.
Right. We go with that in a moment. Thank you again for making the time to be here in Disrupt Everything podcast series to hopefully disrupt ourselves.
Yeah, and the trajectory of the world and move it into a more healthy space.
Amen. So disrupt yourself, then disrupt everyone. Welcome to Disrupt Everything podcast series, a place for interviews, stories, and life experiences about ruckus makers, as Seth Godin used to say, and I love this word, ruckus makers. I think it fits this podcast, it fits our next guest. Also worldwide leaders, disruptors, and high performers that are disrupting themselves and disrupting everything, moving the world, creating change. It's a space for dissecting and deconstructing human potential and life mastery and modern wisdom. It's also a place for exponential growth, self-mastery, disruptive mindset, technology, entrepreneurship, unstoppable attitude, holistic performance, personal reinvention, life hacking, ultra productivity, self-discipline, peak experiences, lifestyle experiments, and above all of that, standing out. It started in 2017 and we are currently in episode 230, I guess,
Wow.
more or less. And we thank to all of you. We count with more than 6 million listens, 2,075, 100,000 downloads a month, and a thriving community that crosses Spanish and English because we have alternate episodes in both languages. So thank you to all of you that are listening or watching this interview. And now I'm going to go through Rick's presentation, but also, first of all, want to also take another quote that I catched in the internet while I was researching Rick's life and experience. And he said, Terence McKenna pointed out that the profundity of hallucinogenic inebriation and its potential for a positive feedback into the process of reorganizing the personality should have long ago made psychedelics an indispensable tool for psychotherapy. This is Rick quote for also Manifesting the Mind, a book he wrote in 2014, which also we put in the podcast show notes so you can check it out. Who is Rick Doblin? Rick is PhD, is the founder and executive director of a multidisciplinary association for psychedelic studies. He received his doctorate in public policy from Harvard Kennedy School of Government, where he wrote his dissertation on the regulation of the medical uses of psychedelics and marijuana, and his master thesis on a survey on oncologists about smoked marijuana abuse versus the oral THC pill nausea control for cancer patients. His undergraduate thesis at New College of Florida was a 25 years follow-up to the classic Good Friday experiment, which evaluated the potential of psychedelic drugs to catalyze religious experiences. He also conducted a 34-year follow-up study to Timothy Leary's Concord Prison experiment. Rick studied with Dr. Stanislav Grof and was among the first to certify as a holotropic breathwork practitioner. His professional goal is to develop legal contexts for beneficial uses of psychedelics and marijuana, primarily as prescription medicines, but also for personal growth for otherwise healthy people and eventually to become a legally licensed psychedelic therapist. He founded MAPS in 1986 and currently resides in Boston with his wife and puppy, with 3 empty rooms for his children who all have graduated and college and begun their life journeys. His TED Talk, The Future of Psychedelic-Assisted Therapy, has more than 4 million listens, more than 4 million views. No listens. Rick also wrote the book Manifesting Minds, a review of psychedelics in science, medicine, sex, and spirituality, featuring essays and interviews with Timothy Leary, Aldous Huxley, Ram Dass, Albert Hoffman, Alexander Shostakhin, Daniel Pinchbeck, Tim Robbins, Arne Ness, and electronic musician Simon Posford, among many others. Rick, also, to finish this presentation, not the interview, I want to address that Rick and MAPS are hosting this year Psychedelic Science 2023, probably surely the largest psychedelic gathering in history, which will be taking place in June 19 to 23rd in Denver. We'll talk about it, and if you are interested in psychedelics, is a must. If I'll try to be there, of course. I'm in a sabbatical, but I think I can include this in the plan of no plan.
Great.
Yeah, would be thrilling to.
Yeah. We've already sold 2,500 tickets, and it's still 5 months away.
Wow! And what's the capacity?
Around 10,000.
Okay, wow. Congratulations.
Yeah, and we have the whole Denver Convention Center, a massive exhibit hall. It's going to be pretty incredible.
So save the date and hope to see you there. Rick's, want to start the questions with before another quote that also touched me, which says the cultural integration of psychedelics won't happen overnight. And the question of young people is perhaps the most difficult involved. The first step is for people who have knowledge of these substances to share it, coming out about their own experiences. Drug education should be honest and present a balanced picture of risks and benefits. Which starts my first question, which after more than 40 years in this field, Rick, more years than I have. So like respect, man. What are for you nowadays, after all of this experience, the potential risks versus the potential benefits of psychedelics today?
Well, that's a very, very good question. So I would say the biggest risk is political and criminal, and that we have a very dysfunctional worldwide global system of prohibition of psychedelics and other drugs. It's a disaster. It fuels underground economies and the most violent distribution networks. It's never been about reducing drug abuse. It's always been about persecuting minorities, the drug war. And, in America last year, we had over 100,000 people died from opiate overdoses, often contaminated with fentanyl. The highest that it's ever been in America. So we can clearly say that the drug war is a massive failure. It's a violation of human rights. It gets in the way of us thinking about exploring our own consciousness, having our own individual spirituality, the freedom of religion, the freedom of thought. So the biggest risk, I think, is cultural, criminal, and based on prohibition. All right. Then in that overall frame, that's why I say that MAPS is 2 parallel paths. One path is drug development through the FDA, through the European Medicines Agency. We're going to have studies in Barcelona and elsewhere. And that's to medicalize and to make it available by prescription, covered by national healthcare insurance. That's one track. The other track is drug policy reform, to make it available to people for their own personal use in, as you say, a more legal access, kind of like a license to drive. It'd be like a license legalization possibility. So there's many different ways to think about it, but I do think that we want to move towards a post-prohibition world where people can have their own experiences, and we train the whole population in harm reduction and the kind of things that can happen, and peer support with pure drugs, with honest drug education, and treatment on demand for people that have issues, paid for by the taxes from all the people buying it. Right. So that's the big frame. Now, there are then two different kinds of risks. There are physiological risks and psychological risks. And I'll differentiate between the classic psychedelics that are like LSD, psilocybin, ayahuasca, peyote, ibogaine, the ones that we think of as, dissolving our sense of self, dissolving our ego, blending with a larger sense of the world. And that the classic psychedelics on one hand, and then MDMA and empathogens and others that are more gentle, that don't do as much ego dissolution. So I would say that the classic psychedelics have more of a psychological risk than the empathogens like MDMA or similar substances. So that, you cannot overdose on LSD. We have stories of LSD chemists, underground LSD chemists that are making large amounts that end up contaminating themselves with 1,000+ doses. And there's no brain damage. It's a hell of a ride for the trip. But so I'd say that the main challenge for the classic psychedelics is psychological. And that's why we say that in a therapeutic context, it's offered with support. There's preparation. There's support during the experience. There's integration afterwards. That the psychedelics can be destabilizing for people. They can bring traumas up to the surface. There are certain kind of people that are that we would say we would exclude from treatment. So it's not clear that psychedelics are good for people with bipolar or psychosis, or certainly good for depression, for PTSD, for addiction, but certain kinds of major mental illness would be people would be excluded, or they would be only studied under inpatient controlled situations. There are people that are interested in looking at MDMA for helping with schizophrenia, and that'd be an interesting thing. It's currently we exclude people with schizophrenia from our studies, but MDMA is more gentle, it's more loving, it's more self-assured, self-acceptance. So there's fewer psychological risks with MDMA than there are with the classic psychedelics, but I'd say there's more physiological risks, particularly when taken in recreational non-medical settings. So that, MDMA does slightly increase the blood pressure. So we exclude people that have uncontrolled hypertension, or that can't do exercise, or that can't climb some stairs, or, so that there is a blood pressure increase. If people do have hypertension, we want them to be controlled with medications, and then also to do a stress test to make sure that they can experience a bit of blood pressure increase. People may have heard about raves, parties with ecstasy or Molly, things like that. And sometimes people overheat. They dance all night. They don't drink adequate fluids. The bars often, shut out the water, because then people will have to buy water or buy alcohol. So it is possible for people to overheat, and it's called hyperthermia. And people have died like that from pure MDMA without adequate fluid replacement. Some people have actually drank too much water and then died from too much water, hyponatremia, it's called. So, in research, we use fluids with electrolytes, not so much water. And people aren't dancing all night. So we have never had a problem with anybody and there's been thousands of people, not just in our studies and other studies, that have received MDMA. Nobody's ever overheated. Nobody has had hyperthermia in these clinical settings. Now, There's also an issue that we do require people to taper off of their SSRIs. So there are people that in recreational settings may take MDMA on top of other medications. The other medications tend to mute the effects of MDMA, not so much dangerous, but if you do, increase the dose of MDMA while people are on SSRIs to feel it, the concern is that they might get what's called serotonin syndrome, which we don't see actually happening. So one of the things that we need to do is what's called a dose response safety study with people on SSRIs to give them increasing amounts of MDMA to see, is there a point where they can have more or less a full MDMA experience, but they don't end up having serotonin syndrome. So we think that's possible. So I'd say that the concerns that people have heard a lot about brain damage and neurotoxicity and holes in your head and draining spinal fluid and LSD hurting your chromosomes, or these are things that don't actually happen in practice. There was a lot of hype about brain damage, draining MDMA, causing serotonin, nerve terminal degeneration. I would say that does happen, but it seems to be happening at doses higher than people take in therapy. And even then, it seems to be relatively mild, if at all. I mean, the consequences have been looked at in terms of long-term neurocognitive consequences, but these are from people that are ecstasy users, meaning they've done all sorts of other drugs. It's not clear that they've taken pure MDMA. And a study was done, funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, done out of Harvard, with what we found a group of people that had not done marijuana, tobacco, coffee, other psychedelics, and had just really done ecstasy. And these were a group of, we called it the fallen Mormons, the Mormon religion out in Salt Lake City. And the young rebellious people, before ecstasy was put on the banned list, they felt, we didn't grow up doing any drugs, but let's do a lot of ecstasy. And so we studied those people, or the researchers at Harvard did, and it was very reassuring. Hardly anything was found. It could be just artifacts. So I think that from a neurotoxicity perspective, MDMA is that is not a real physiological risk that we're concerned about with MDMA when used in therapy. I mean, if people use higher doses for days and days or weeks at a time, yeah, you can get some problems. But even then, it seems like if people stop that after having done it for a while, they return to normal after 6 to 9 months, something like that. So all of this is to say that we think that the risk-benefit ratio from using pure psychedelics in supportive, safe therapeutic contexts is acceptable, and that the benefits are starting to be demonstrated. And that's why both MDMA and psilocybin have been declared by the FDA to be breakthrough drugs, because the benefits are potentially so large.
Rick, one thing is, after what you say, one thing is clear to me, at least if I'm not wrong, which is the importance and the serious importance of the set and setting.
Yes.
So what will be your perfect set and setting for a psychedelic experience?
Right. Well, the most important part is to feel a sense of safety, that you are not physically at risk of, because as you focus inward, you're not paying attention to the external world. So if you're in danger of being abused or robbed or raped, or you have to be safe. So the most important thing is that you have a safe context. The second most important part of this is that when we're doing therapy, people are struggling with internal issues. And so in our 8-hour MDMA session, around half of it, in no particular order, people's eyes are closed. They often have eye shades. They've got headphones. They're listening to music. They're having kind of a metaphorical, poetic storytelling of their lives, going through their mind. and emotions, and it's somatic in their body. It's so your attention is really inward, not on the outer environment. So that's, again, the essential aspect of safety, the set and setting. You should feel safe to not have to pay attention to the world, to just pay attention to your inner world. The therapists, if you have therapists there, they should be people that you know, that you have some trust in, that because there are moods and experiences that are sort of letting emotions out. Often there's crying or making noise. So you should be in a place where you can make noise, where you don't have to stay quiet, where you can scream if you feel like, or cry or shake, or do any number of kind of physical vocalizations as this is happening. I'd say that this idea of a set and setting where there is fluid replacement, but it's not water, it's electrolytes, fruit juices, things like that, that it can be outdoors. Doing psychedelics in nature is inspiring and beautiful, but is it private enough? Is it warm enough? What do you do if it rains? Things like that. Then, from a point of view of the setting, I mean, you can customize a hospital room in a kind of cold clinical hospital setting, and therapy does take place in those settings. And you tend to put some nice paintings, rug on the floor, some flowers. You try to make it so it's like a cold clinical hospital room, but you can do it inside that setting. You could do it in a beautiful house, overlooking nature, or you could do it in a house in the city or a clinic in the middle. So it's more the privacy, the safety, and ideally you would be with people that are trained, that understand the range of psychedelic experiences that you could have, that are not scared if you are having non-ego type experiences. That you would be with people that understand the landscape, the inner landscape of the psyche, that is accessible through psychedelics, accessible through meditation, through dreams, through other ways, through fasting. These are not psychedelic experiences, but they're human experiences that the psychedelics make more evident and possible. So the ideal setting would be with people that are sophisticated and aware and not so triggered by their own emotions. So that if you're working on a particular trauma, if your therapists have that same trauma that they've not worked through, when you're getting close to something difficult, they might then resist because it stirs up things in themselves. So you need ideally therapists that have done their own work, that are really there to support you, are not triggered by what you're doing. You also ideally, again, need a context that is filled with the understanding that it's not the experience itself only, that you need preparation and you need integration afterwards, that you need to talk about it. We tell people don't make decisions while you're under the influence of psychedelics. Think it over. Wait till the next week or two. But the next day, it's very important to have a lot of supportive psychotherapy to really ground and integrate what happened during the psychedelic day. And I think that music is important for the setting. Not all the time, but it's good sometimes we use often music without words to sort of carry people emotionally, to give them energy, to give them peace, dynamic music, peaceful music, beautiful music at different times during the day. Some, the classic indigenous cultures that use peyote or ayahuasca, they have music as part of their ceremonies. They have singing, they have prayers, they have music. So I think music is an important part of the setting, although, there's sometimes in my own trips where I just wanted to turn the music off and just be quiet and see what's going on.
Silence.
Silence inside my own head. I actually have done psychedelics. I had a flotation tank in my house for years.
Beautiful. I go tomorrow to a flotation tank, by the way.
Really?
Yeah.
Great. So I've done LSD and MDMA inside the flotation tank. And I've found it to be marijuana also a bunch. And I found it to be very, very helpful. So again, you're not with a therapist, you're by yourself. You're really, really by yourself because you're cutting out a lot of your senses. But I think a flotation tank can be an excellent setting for more people that are experienced, because again, you don't have a therapist right there. Although at any of these, I think a setting, it's good to have somebody there that's not on psychedelics. Somebody like we hear a lot in America, and I'm sure it's now around the world, about this idea of a designated driver. If you and your friends are going to a bar and you're drinking, you want one person that's not drinking to drive you around, or just to be the intermediary between you and the outside world. And so I think a setting is good. The therapists are ideally there, and at least one of them is not high, so that you have this buffer between you and the world, and you have like a touchstone for what's real, what's not, what's internal, what's external. I've been sitting sometimes for people where they really lose a sense of what's inside and what's outside, what's real, because they're so wrapped up in their inner stories, their inner histories, their struggles, their traumas, that I've seen people lose track what's inside and what's outside. And so that's why I think a setting is really good to have somebody that's not on psychedelics, that's grounded, that's there as a buffer between you and the outside world to protect your space. But just as it can be done in nature, surrounded by enormous sounds of birds and things and beautiful colors and stuff, you could do it in a flotation tank. The four principles that we say, and I think this is kind of important, is for our psychedelic harm reduction. We do it at Burning Man, we do it at Boom Festival in Portugal, other things. The first thing is, when somebody's having a difficult trip, the first thing is that you create a safe space. And that's what I said, this feeling of safety. The second thing is that you see yourself as the sitter. You're not the guide. The person's unconscious is the guide. The people know their history. They know their memories. We're supporting them to do their own exploration. But we're you could say it's not that we know the territory. We know the kinds of things that can happen, meaning we, the therapists, but the person is their own healer. So we are seeing it that way. We're sort of helping people to heal themselves. The third part is that we talk them through, not talk down. What that means is that you go towards the trauma, like the traditional medicines from psychiatrists, the SSRIs and others. They reduce your symptoms. They don't get to the core root of the problem, but they help you to manage. And so in psychedelic therapy, what we're doing is helping people go to the root of the problem, to resolve it, to express it, to revisit it. And so we talk through, not talk down. We don't want to take people away. Sorry if you're hearing my dog in the background. All right, and then the final thing.
Dogs here too, so.
The final thing that we say is
that.
That difficult is not the same as bad. And I think that's really important for people to understand. You can have a very difficult experience, but you can learn an enormous amount from it. And what's bad is resistance. So when we talk about set and setting, the key part for the experiencer is to be open to whatever is coming, whether it makes sense, whether it's somatic in the body, whether it's a memory, whatever it is, to be open in that way. And that when you start resisting it, that's when it turns, quote, bad. But difficult is not the same as bad. And I think you can learn as much or more from difficult as from easy. And so I think that's a good overview on set and setting.
Rick, we tend to go for the shortcut. We take master plans and that's it. But too often we don't pay attention to the preparation and integration, as you said. What can you say about it, and how can you address an ideal preparation process and integration afterwards?
Yeah. Well, one thing that people don't really recognize, or we sort of all know, is that every night when we dream, when we go to sleep, we enter into a psychedelic state. It's like the barrier between the conscious and the unconscious is weakened, and we have all sorts of memories and emotions, and it's really quite remarkable what happens during dreams. So I think one of the best preparations for a psychedelic experience is for people to start paying attention to their dreams a week or two beforehand, or and one tool for that is to just have a dream journal. with by your bed with a pencil or a pen. And every time you wake up, if you have any fragments of dreams, you write them down. And I got to the point sometimes where I was waking up 3 or 4 times during the night to write down dreams. And it was incredible. And the more you do that, the more you will remember them. Also in the morning, if you don't just like get out of bed and rush, but you like give yourself a few minutes just to think about your dreams. Because what we see is that the content of a psychedelic experience will often move from the psychedelic experience into people's dreams. So dreams can be a particularly effective way for the integration process as well. So I think that for me, at least, what I tend to notice is the night after a psychedelic trip, I don't remember any dreams. It's like I've exhausted that part of my psyche during the psychedelic experience. But the night after, there's kind of a rebound of dreams, and the dreams are often related to the content, the issues, the emotions of the psychedelic session. I think the preparation is something to emphasize a lot. And in particular, this idea, the difference between, I'd say, recreational use of psychedelics and therapeutic or spiritual use is that when you're wanting to use them recreationally, you're doing them for fun, for a good time. That's the kind of general theme of, recreation, but when people do that, they might not be willing to be open to the difficult emotions. So to give you an example, this is like 15 years ago. One week, 2 women contacted MAPS with similar but different stories. Both of them had taken MDMA, ecstasy, Molly, whatever they called it, at a rave. And both of them had memories come back of prior sexual abuse. And one woman said that she was with a bunch of friends. They only wanted to have fun. She felt that she couldn't really talk to them about what was going on because it would bring them down. It was a sad thing. And so she stuffed the feelings. And she said that months later, she felt worse. Another woman said that she was with a rave. Memories of sexual abuse came up after she had done ecstasy. She was with a girlfriend. They went off in a corner. They talked about it for an hour or so. She did a lot of emotional processing. And she then was able to go back to the party and dance more. And she felt that she had really helped with her PTSD. And she thought, oh, MDMA could be good for PTSD. And she did a Google search, and then she found that we were researching that. So the preparation is to be willing to experience whatever is coming up. I think that's the really important part of the preparation, and to get yourself in the mood and to think about what are your issues, what are your intentions. There's a lot that can be done to sort of prepare in a good way for a psychedelic session. I would say, though, that once you've done all this preparation and you have all your intentions and you have everything there of what you want to work on, then you just, right before you take the substance, you just throw all that away. And you just think, okay, now whatever's coming is going to come. I've done all my intentions, but you don't hold to that. Whatever comes will come. I think that the integration is critical because, again, for a recreational experience, you're going for what happens during the moment, and you don't think about what do you bring back, because the goal here for therapy is to change your baseline. It's to do such deep work in the psychedelic session that you are able to get to the core issues. You're able to see them in a different way. You're able to let out trapped emotions, and you're able to change your baseline. And the way to do that is through the integration process. You need to really think about it a lot. You need to work on it. You need to put things in practice. So you may have made a fundamental shift during the psychedelic session, but if you don't pay attention to it, you don't work on the integration, it will eventually fade. And so I think that the integration, the integration and preparation are really critical. And I think the more attention you put to both of those, the deeper you can go in the session and the more you will get out of it. And so part of the preparation is creating the set. Yeah, so I think that's really the preparation is creating the set and setting that you want. Who do you want to be there? Where is it? How are you going to do it? Another big part of the preparation, I would just say, again, we've had people tell us that, or we've heard stories of people that have died from fentanyl put in ecstasy pills. So another part of the preparation, I would say, is making sure that you know what you're actually about to take. That's, again, another problem of prohibition. It's not a problem in clinical research, but it is a problem of prohibition for non-medical use. So I think an important part of preparation is trying to assure yourself that whatever you do have is what you think it is.
Where do you think, where can people go to find a detailed set and setting and integration or preparation guide?
Well, actually, there's an old book by a fellow Norman Zinberg called Drug, Set, and Setting. That's a good one. But what I would say is there's a book by Stan Grof that's, I believe, translated into Spanish. It's The Way of the Psychonaut. And it's a 2-volume book. And it's the summary of his, Stan is now 91. He is the most experienced psychedelic therapist in the world and has done incredible theoretical work, developed holotropic breath work, which when LSD was criminalized, the way that you can get into psychedelic experiences just through hyperventilation. He has inspired and mentored many of the leading early pioneer LSD researchers and MDMA researchers and psychedelic researchers, psilocybin researchers. So Way of the Psychonaut, I think, would be a tremendous book for people to read. It is 2 volumes, as I said, but it's a really good introduction to what do you call the cartography of the unconscious, the range of experiences you could have, and also a lot of discussions about setting, preparation, and integration.
Thank you for the recommendation. We will make sure that we put it in the show notes. Rick, what motivated you to get into the psychedelic world?
Okay. That's a very, very important question. And actually, it was 50 years ago, 1972, that I decided to focus my life on psychedelics. So almost 51 years ago. What was the critical factor was that my parents, I would say, the way that I was educated is that I was educated that I was a link in a chain. And the chain started, way back. But in America, my great-grandparents came as refugees in 1880 from Russia. And my grandparents on my dad's side came in 1920. My grandfather came running from anti-Semitism in Poland. So I'm coming from refugees and
No, but I have 2 dogs here, and I thought it was going to be also mine. So yeah,
okay, come on. All right. So what I was told, though, I'm a Jewish family, and so I was educated on stories of the Holocaust from a very young age. So I was born in 1953. So the cruelty of humans, the irrationality, the mental illness that would permit that. How do we dehumanize others? How do we, murder them? How do we justify that? So it led me to think about mental properties, about and us and them kind of thinking. So my relatives were like refugees. Then they became successful in America, so the American dream. And then I was trained sort of that I had to make a contribution to deeper threats, in a way, of what can happen to humans due to other humans. Then, as a young boy, I was involved in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Meaning that I was in school when they're teaching us that, the world could blow up and there could be a nuclear war, and you just duck under your desk and you'll duck and cover. So that was a terrifying kind of a education to get as a young boy, 10-year-old, that, oh my God, the world could blow up completely. So it, again, exposed me to the insanity aspects of the human psyche, of how we could do that. And then the next step was the Vietnam War, where I saw it was my own country. I was in one of the last years of the lottery. I was a draft resistor, prepared to go to jail for nonviolent resistance to the war. So it was these psychological factors. It led me to really think about how we dehumanize others. But I believed all the propaganda about psychedelics. I didn't really understand them. I thought that if you took LSD 5 or 6 times, you were certifiably insane. That's all it took, that you had chromosome damage. I believed all this stuff. until I read a book in high school. It was my senior year of high school, and I loved this book. And the fella who gave it to me, a friend of mine in the Russian class, said, after I turned the book back to him, he said, the author wrote some of this book while he was high on LSD. And I'm like, that's impossible. Nothing good comes from LSD. It's disorienting. It's hallucinations. And he said, no, check it out. Turned out he was right. He was right. It was Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And he did write some of that on LSD. So that was the thing that really opened my eyes to psychedelics. And then when I first tried them, I'm so sorry.
No problem.
Okay. When I first tried them, I went beyond the ego, and I felt like I was connecting with something bigger than myself. And I thought, so it was really politics that got me into psychedelics. I thought, wow, if we can feel connected to everything and understand our similarities more than our differences, that they're more, so whether we're from Spain or America, we still are humans, and also we share so much with the animals and nature. I thought that politically, this mystical sense of connection could be an antidote to fundamentalism, to genocide, to racism, to environmental destruction. And I thought, okay, if I take a lot of psychedelics, I had the delusion, the more psychedelics I take, the faster I'll evolve. And I didn't value integration. I didn't value, I valued preparation, but I didn't really understand the integration. So I ended up taking a lot of psychedelics, getting very confused. I went to the guidance counselor at college. This is 1972. And I said, help me with my psychedelic trips. And the guidance counselor took me seriously, and he gave me a book. And this was the one that changed my life, that it was Realms of the Human Unconscious, Observations from LSD Research by Stan Grof. And reading that book, and the amazing part is the guidance counselor knew Stan. The book wasn't published till 1975, but I got a manuscript copy in 1972. And reading that book and learning about the therapeutic potential of psychedelics, and also about the way that you could use science to understand the mystical experience of connection. So it was both the political and therapeutic. And my guidance counselor I said, I want to write to Stan and get his advice on what kind of training I should have to become a psychedelic therapist. And so I did write to Stan 51 years ago, 1972. And he wrote me back. And I went to a workshop with him in 1972. And it was just amazing. So what got me into psychedelics, to summarize, was the hope for an experience that, if magnified by millions and billions of people, could create a spiritualized humanity, mass mental health, and it would make it so that fascist dictators and people that motivate people based on fear, on hatred of the other, that wouldn't be possible anymore. And so it was really to avoid another Holocaust, to avoid blowing us up with the Russians, to avoid, my own country doing things that didn't make sense in Vietnam, imperialistic adventures. And so I still have that hope 50 years from now, from then, and that this psychedelics can contribute in an important way to the health of individuals and to the health of larger groups, and eventually humanity as a whole. Because I think we are at risk of destroying ourselves. The species extinction that's going on at a rate more than at the dinosaurs some of the time, that we are ravaging the world, climate change. We're like lemmings going off a cliff. On the other hand, we're miraculous technology that you and I can do this podcast from so far away. And we're sort of seeing and talking to each other in real time. I mean, it's a miracle. And other people can see this. So we have brilliant technology, and we don't have the emotional or spiritual potential to deal with it. And so that's what I recognized in 1972. Einstein has said that the splitting of the atom has changed everything except our way of thinking. And hence we drift towards unparalleled catastrophe. What shall be required if mankind is to survive is a whole new manner of thinking. Now, what is that new manner of thinking? It's that we're all in it together, that there's no private utopias, there's no, Carl Jung has said that the most important political, spiritual, and therapeutic work we can do is to withdraw the projection of our shadow onto others. The shadow is those things that we disown in ourselves, and we project them onto others. So the evil is all out there, it's not in here. And so I think psychedelics can help us withdraw the projection of our shadow, deal with our own inner selves, and harmonize, accept that we have all these tendencies as well, and then see people through less of a filter, and have these touchstone experiences that connect us with nature, connect us with evolution, connect us with history. And so that's what got me into psychedelics, the idealistic hope that the more people have these experiences in supportive ways, the better the world will be.
What an amazing job, Rick, so far. So congratulations.
Yeah.
What you have been in the field for more than, not 40, as I was saying at the beginning, more than 50 years. Can you just briefly guide us through the evolution of psychedelics so far, like at least in the recent years, because the wave is growing.
Yeah, I can. So let me start though, very broadly, to say that the foundations of Western culture we think are the Greeks. That's where the democracy was created. That's where sort of Western culture, and we think about Plato and Aristotle and Pythagoras and all these kind of giants of the Greek world of over 2,000 years ago. And they all participated in mystery ceremonies that involved psychedelics, particularly the Eleusinian mysteries. It started around 1600 BC. So, 36 plus 100 years ago. And they ran for 2,000 years as the foundation of Western culture. And the Eleusinian mysteries were wiped out around 396 or so by the Catholic Church, that wanted to be the intermediary between people and spirituality. So it was a power grab. It was an authoritarian power grab. And the psychedelics and the Eleusinian mysteries were considered pagan, but they helped people to have their own individual experience, not mediated by priests, involving psychedelic drugs. And so I would say that when we talk about integrating psychedelics into society, we're talking about reintegrating. And the real time that the repression began was around 400 AD, in this incredible period of time. And then we see during the thousands plus years after that, during the Middle Ages, the women that were connected to plant medicines and psychedelics were burned as witches. Again, they were being direct experience in contradiction to the church, setting up these intermediaries between you and spirituality. And when the conquistadors started coming over from Spain, you conquistador, mean conquistadors, started coming over to the New World, what did they do? The first thing they recognized is we're the power sources of these communities. It's their religious leaders. It's the use of peyote. It's the use of mushrooms. It's the use of ayahuasca. Let's kill all these leaders. And so that's the legacy of the conquistadors, and so then we get the Spanish Inquisition, and we get all of this kind of horrible stuff. And so basically psychedelics have been underground since 400, and they emerged in this incredible flowering in the 60s in the United States, in around the world, because of the invention of or the invention of LSD by Albert Hofmann, and the synthesis of psilocybin in 1958, also by Albert Hofmann. And so these tools now that had been underground for millennium and a half were now more widely available. So we had the explosion of the psychedelic 60s, and it was involved with people disrupting society, disrupting everything, protesting the Vietnam War, protesting environmental, the women's rights movements, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, all of this. And that became such a challenge to the status quo that there was a massive backlash. And that was President Nixon saying drugs are the enemy number one. We're going to start a drug war. We're going to wipe out psychedelic research for decades. And that's what happened. And so we had this sort of cultural amnesia to psychedelics. If you were a psychiatrist, you didn't hear a thing about it in medical school during the 70s and 80s. And it was only after several decades that, and largely I would say through the development of MDMA, which revitalized the underground psychedelic therapy community, helped people see a lot of healings, was more gentle than the classic psychedelics, that we started having psychedelics emerge back into public consciousness in the 80s, again, through MDMA in public ways and in private ways. And then, again, the backlash against that with the criminalization of MDMA in 84. But then starting around 1992, the FDA had a critical meeting to review our protocol for MDMA. We wanted to propose working with cancer patients with anxiety. And the FDA decided to have a special meeting to see, should they resume psychedelic research? And the decision was yes. And so since 1992, starting in the US, then going around in Switzerland and elsewhere, there's been this gradual increase in the amount of psychedelic research that was permitted. Now we have about 4 or 5 times as much psychedelic research as there was in the 1960s. So we are truly in a psychedelic renaissance with more psychedelic research now than ever before. And we have hundreds of for-profit psychedelic companies. They've been able to raise billions of dollars from the capital markets. And so we are at this time of the flourishing. At the same time, we've all been through the pandemic. There's ever increasing amounts of depression, anxiety, social anxiety, isolation, mental illness, and people are becoming more aware of the stresses of trauma and mental illness. So we're at a time where the old ways are falling apart. There is a lot of disruption going on. There's a lot of need. And so I think that we are seeing the emergence of a lot of resources and hope placed on healing potential of psychedelics. And of all these hundreds of companies, there's only one that's in phase 3 right now, which is MAPS. And not only are we in phase 3, but we have completed 2 phase 3 studies. And these phase 3 is the final stage of research. January 5th, we put out a press release, 2023, about the successful conclusion of our second phase 3 study. So we are now on track for gathering all of our data to submit to FDA, Health Canada, and the Ministry of Health in Israel, where our phase 3 studies took place.
Well, MAPS, my next question leads to MAPS. So what have you learned from founding MAPS? It was back in, if I recall well, back in
86.
1986.
Yeah.
1986. What been your life-changing lessons, or what have you learned from MAPS?
Great question. So I'd say the first thing I've learned is that there are a lot of generous people that really want to make a contribution to trying to make a more peaceful, a more harmonious, a more spiritual world. So, we've raised about $140 million in donations and grants since we started, and that's an enormous amount of money. I learned also that the regulatory agencies are now open to this sort of research. They weren't when I started. From 1986 to 1992, we had 6 protocols from Harvard, from UC San Francisco, from academic researchers, all rejected by the FDA. So the FDA was not open to this. The research when we started this was all suppressed. 1986, psychedelic research was still completely suppressed. So I've learned that over time, regulatory agencies have learned to put more of the science before the politics. One thing I've learned that's been essential is that we have managed to get bipartisan support for the research from Republicans and Democrats, in large part because of the work with veterans, firefighters, police officers, first responders, that, in America now, pretty much everything is caught up in the culture wars. The college that I went to, that I described, where I had my early LSD experiences and where I went to the guidance counselor. The governor of Florida, DeSantis, is now trying to kill that college. It's the Honors College of the state of Florida. He's trying to squash it because it's a progressive liberal school, and he wants to turn it into like a Christian right-wing school. So, I've learned that, pretty much everything these days is wrapped up in these culture wars. But psychedelics, we've managed to make an escape. It's an issue that is not culture wars because we have strong, strong Republican support because of the work with veterans. So I learned about the importance of the political aspect to permit the science and the healing to go forward. I also learned through all of these years that we are trying to open up the field of psychedelic medicine. So while we have focused just on MDMA, our real goal is to make it available for therapists to have access to ketamine, to LSD, to psilocybin, to MDMA, to ayahuasca, to mescaline. That really it's not about MDMA. MDMA is just the leading edge. Again, we're the only ones in phase 3, the only ones have finished phase 3. But that it's about the whole field. It's about the whole ecosystem. It's about bringing psychedelics forward. And also that the work that we do on drug policy reform at this stage is not causing obstructions by the regulatory agencies. Because we're trying to say it should be legal as well, that's no longer hindering the research. The research is on one track. The drug policy reform is on another track. And I think because there's been such a disillusionment around the world with prohibition and the negative consequences, the harmful aspects of it, and the utter failure to stop drug abuse, that the stories about healing potential of psychedelics in the past and the healing potentials of marijuana were resisted because they, quote, tell a different story than prohibitionists were telling. That, it used to be one dose of MDMA, permanent brain damage, major functional consequences. And marijuana was a puff, a party, a tragedy. Marijuana leads to death. And so there was a lot of resistance to research into beneficial uses of marijuana or beneficial uses of psychedelics because of the narrative of the drug war. The narrative of the drug war has gone way down. There's not a lot of support. So I've learned that we can do both of these things without hurting politically what we're doing, drug policy reform, and also that. I've also learned the power of the placebo effect. And so just to say as an interesting thing, I believe in this idea of how do you do research, the placebo. We've had a protocol to give MDMA to about 120 therapists. And the protocol was 4 days. It was either you get MDMA or a placebo, a day of integration, then you get the crossover, and then another day of integration. And it was all double blind. And we've had 2 situations where psychiatrists who've never done psychedelics, barely smoked marijuana, who went through our training program, watched a week of videotapes of therapy sessions, and saw the way people responded to MDMA. And then when they volunteered to be in this protocol, they were so eager to have MDMA, and they had this sense, they were therapists, they were psychiatrists, that they were delighted that they got MDMA on the first time, not the placebo. And they worked on childhood trauma, worked on all these issues in such a deep way, pupil dilation, all these things, that they were amazed at what MDMA had done. And the most experienced therapists that we have are the trainers giving MDMA to other therapists. Everybody at the end of the day was completely convinced that it was 100% MDMA. And this was 2 psychiatrists with 2 of the different teams of our most experienced therapists. As it turned out, when they got their day for the crossover, and it turned out that was the real MDMA, not the placebo, everybody was shocked and stunned at how they could have what looked like a full MDMA experience without any MDMA at all. And when they did have the MDMA, what they said was, well, this was deeper, it was more effortless, but I was able to make enormous progress just with my mind. So I think these kind of double-blind, placebo-controlled studies, you think everybody will be able to tell whether they got real MDMA or not. But in a few instances, the most experienced people we have were completely confused or completely believed that it was really MDMA when it wasn't. So I've learned about the power of the placebo, and that's actually a really good thing, that we want to say to people that the experience is in you. The drug helps us to feel that. And over time, you can learn how to do that more on your own. And so that's, again, this integration process. That's what we're trying to do. It's the opposite of traditional pharma, where here's a pill. It just reduces your symptoms, and take it for the rest of your life. And if you stop taking it, your problems come back. What we're trying to say is, let's do deep work with the psychedelic, with the therapy, get to the core problem, and make it so you don't need psychedelics anymore, unless you want to for other things. So we're really trying to liberate people, make them free, make them healed, neuroplasticity. I also learned, I'd say this is an important point, which is that from the point of regulatory agencies, you have to prove safety and you have to prove efficacy, that it works and that there's a favorable risk-benefit ratio. But you do not have to know how it works.
That's very interesting.
That's called mechanism of action. And we have a lot of things that we don't really know how it works. And the brain is so complex that to really get a sense of how does the brain work, it may take 50 more years or who knows. But the point is that to make something into a medicine, you don't need to know how it works. You just need to show that it works and that it's safe enough. And so there's a lot of fundamental difference between academic research, where at universities, government-funded research, a lot of that is trying to figure out what are the mechanisms of action, which neurotransmitters are impacted, how does it actually work? And that's why I think we're ahead of everybody, because we didn't care how it worked. We knew that the FDA didn't care how it worked. The European Medicines Agency doesn't care how it works. We just showed that it works. So I'd say that was one of the biggest things. And that's a differentiation between academic research and drug development research. I'd say one of the other things that I've learned is how translatable the approach to therapy is to our approach to harm reduction at festivals and others. So that it's when people take psychedelics and they get deeper than they thought and they get mixed up and stuff, the support work that we do, the harm reduction work that we do at Boom, at Burning Man and elsewhere, that the therapeutic approach is very similar to, pretty much the same as to the therapeutic approach in a clinical setting. So that we are able to teach harm reduction, peer support, using the same principles that we use in the therapeutic setting. So it gives me hope that we can actually train large amounts of population in how to handle their own experiences if this is made into a legal substance, as we think it should, all these psychedelics. So I think those are the major learnings that I've had since MDMA. And I guess the one that I'll add right now, and this is the big issue for me that's motivating a lot of what I'm trying to do now, is the difference between really operating in the public benefit and operating for investors. And so it's very important, I think, that MAPS go all the rest of the way with donors if we can avoid investors, because I see a lot of what happens when investors and private profit and don't share it and don't build the ecosystem. And, so
That's very interesting.
Yeah, I've been very worried about that. And I guess the other thing I want to add, which is about the role of politics in the science. So politics blocked the science for decades and decades when research was suppressed. And politics is what is permitting the science to take place now. So the fact that we've taken this out of the culture wars. But I just want to add that the very first MDMA PTSD study that we ever did in a study was in Madrid. And this was in 2000. And it was going really well. And it was women survivors of sexual assault with PTSD. And after about 6 people had been treated, and it was a dose response, starting low doses, moving up to 25 milligrams, 50 milligrams. We just got to the 50 milligram dose group. And La Paz wanted to do a story. There was a story on TV, and it alerted the Madrid Anti-Drug Authority. And actually, the U.S. National Institute on Drug Abuse had funded a lot of research into MDMA neurotoxicity by researchers at Johns Hopkins that were not really balanced, that they were funded by the government to show what's bad with MDMA. They were researchers that spoke Spanish, and they were sent to Spain to whip up fear about MDMA, because here it was, now we're starting to look at the benefits.
Wow.
And so, unfortunately, the Madrid Anti-Drug Authority was motivated by the media and by these researchers sent over from the US, from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and they shut the study down. And it was heartbreaking because, again, there was no safety issues in the study. It was our first opening in the world to do anything with MDMA for PTSD. And before it really got fully into the more effective doses, it was shut down. So it was really heartbreaking. And that really helped me understand, again, the role of politics in the science. You think that science is free, but it's not. Science is constrained by politics. And so that was a key lesson, that really we needed to focus on politics. That's why I got my PhD from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard on the political dimensions and the regulatory dimensions of making psychedelics into medicines. We've always had to have both a scientific, healing, and political agenda to keep going. And now we're getting ready to start research in Barcelona with MDMA. We now have the political capacity around the world to bring support, and also the dynamics have changed, particularly I think with Portugal legalizing or decriminalizing psychedelics and their society, and other drugs too, and their society benefiting from that, not being harmed from that. And so I think it's really delicate, but I guess it's getting more solid all the time. And the fact that we can start research in Spain after it was shut down 22 years ago is particularly satisfying.
I hope I can contribute to get this more, to get the word out. We should talk about it. Yeah. Possible, for sure. Well, what are the biggest takeaways from your first and last entheogenic experience, Rick?
Let me say my first was that well, when I was 13, I had my bar mitzvah, and I was the oldest of 4 children, and you think these rituals from your religious, these rites of passage, will somehow or other touch you in a deep way, that they're going to actually change you. There's something about it. I believed that it would change me, but it did not change me. So I remember waking up the morning after my bar mitzvah and like, where's God? I'm the same person. The ritual I did, nothing changed. And I thought, oh, it was a busy day. God's busy. Maybe tomorrow morning. And you're 13 years old. You don't know what. So I kept waiting for a whole week, and nothing happened. And then finally, it was another Saturday, and a whole new crop of people were bar mitzvahed. And I was like, I'm not on the list. I have dropped off the list. Nothing's going to happen to me. This ritual that maybe in thousands of years past, or maybe even 100 years past, or maybe even in certain cultures now, it still is a big, real rite of transformation and, a rite of passage. But for me, it wasn't. But when I first took LSD from my first psychedelic experience, I was like, wow, this is what my bar mitzvah should have been. I'm asking, who am I? Where do I fit in the universe? What is spirituality? How do I relate to life and death and history? And so my first experience primarily was, wow, this is what my bar mitzvah should have been. This is engaging those elements of the psyche that I had hoped my bar mitzvah would do. The most recent one, I'll just say that I was in a group of people. This is pretty recent, that were experimenting. It was a sort of therapeutic party experience with MDMA and other things. And I had decided that I would not actually do anything. That I was, I like to My wife and I find MDMA super helpful for couples therapy, and we try to do it pretty much every year, and we're getting close to that time. So at this party setting, but with therapists and stuff, I said, all right, I'm not going to take anything. I'll just rely on the contact high of being in this space with everybody. I'll try to be the last to leave. I'll try to be here with everybody, but I won't actually take it. And so you asked me for my most recent entheogenic experience. And so this was, I felt like I was on MDMA by being with this group of people. It was just extraordinary. I was able to sort of drop. Now, I've done MDMA about 130 times in the last 40 years. So I have a substantial amount of experience in this MDMA state. But the fact that I could be influenced by people in an MDMA state to sort of drop in there, it was joyous. It was peaceful. And I wasn't on anything at all. So I'd say that it was an entheogenic experience, like the placebo effect that we talked about. It was remarkable. And so I feel that, I can't just willfully do it. Like, oh, I'm going to be on MDMA. I'm going to have a hard conversation with somebody and I'll be like MDMA. I can't always do that. I get wrapped up in all the different kind of emotions and stuff. But occasionally at moments surrounded by other people in that state, I think it is a testament to the fact that these spaces are inside us. And that was a reminder that was the case. So that was a big, big learning not too long ago from a party setting and a contact high.
Relating to this question, how can we make a more conscious use of psychedelics? With that,
okay. Well, I think with preparation, preparation makes it more conscious rather than, oh, I'm at a party, I'll take it. The integration, being willing to experience whatever is going to come up. I think that's really big. To do it in a conscious way. And by the way, I just want to share that it's snowing outside beautifully. It's
thank
the
you.
biggest snow of the year right now.
Really?
Yeah. It's really beautiful. So I'm seeing white out everywhere, and so
thanks for sharing.
Yeah. So I think the consciousness is, to respect. These are extremely powerful substances that do disrupt our normal patterns of thinking. And it can be harnessed in a profoundly healing and spiritual and growthful way, or it can be frivolous and more or less, not long term, or it can be harmful. And so I think that this approaching it in a more conscious way, there's a big part of that, and the big part of that, I would say now, is the obligation of people to come out of the closet, come out of the psychedelic medicine cabinet, so to speak, and to share with others what happened. We look at gay rights and gay marriage, and even though there's a backlash in a lot of places right now, what really made progress is for people to come out and say, you think gay people are all terrible, but, here I am, and you didn't know I'm gay, and look what I've accomplished, and, stuff like that. So I think we need to do psychedelics in a conscious way. We need to recognize that it's our obligation to speak in public. You could even start with your family. If your parents think it's a difficult thing or you should never do it, educate your parents, educate your children, educate your relatives, educate your friends at work. I think that to do this fully in a conscious way means to speak your truth to the public, to try to change the decades and decades of fear that have been built up by anti-drug propaganda and by genuine concerns that it is disruptive. And if you're not prepared, you could end up worse off. So I think telling our stories in public is a big part of doing this in a conscious way.
On your book, Manifesting Mind, you interviewed Timothy Leary, Ramdas, Hoffman, Tim Robbins, among many others. Can you tell us one thing that stands from the rest that you have learned from them?
Oh, yeah. Well, I've learned from all of these different people that that we all have our own filters, and that we see these things through different filters, and we come from different places. So for some, this is an experience of psychedelics should only be reserved for people that are mature, that are sophisticated, that are intellectual. For others, they think it should be widely distributed for anybody can benefit. Other people prefer this psychedelic to that psychedelic, or other people see more of the politics and other people see less of the politics and just more of the science. But I'd say what I've learned from all of these people, the most important thing I've learned, which is both incredibly obvious but also easy to overlook, is that people remember their psychedelic experiences. You asked me what my first experience was. Yeah, it was, 51 years ago, and I can remember parts of it. There's something about the psychedelic experience for all of these people that we spoke to that gets embedded deep in your consciousness, deep in your memory, deep in neuroplasticity and changing your mind. That these are experiences that are consequential and that we need to approach them with respect and care and give them the preparation and the time during it to go anywhere, and then the integration. And I think just the fact that people can remember things that happened 50 years ago, or they remember critical moments, that these are transformative, disruptive experiences, and we want to disrupt in a growthful way rather than a destructive way.
Rick, after all these years of research, what is the most impactful discovery ever made by MAPS on psychedelics?
Well, I would say the most impactful is that we can prove that we can get great results in 2 phase 3 studies. I mean, that's the most impactful, because that means that it's going to be possible, it looks like, to make it into a medicine, to meet the regulatory hurdles.
Wow.
The other thing I'll say that is I think useful here, and is that what we hear about in terms of the early work in the 50s and 60s with LSD and psilocybin, with alcoholics, with heroin addicts, with people anxious about dying, with and the research over the last 20 plus years with psilocybin, with the other classic psychedelics, is that the depth of the mystical experience is correlated with therapeutic outcomes. The more you have this unitive mystical experience, the more you go beyond your ego states, the more you have this profound mystical experience, the deeper will be your recovery from addiction, your recovery from depression, your recovery from obsessive compulsive disorder, and all these things. But that is true for the classic psychedelics. And I'd say one of the most important things we've discovered is that in MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD, there is no correlation between the depth of the mystical experience and therapeutic outcomes recovering from PTSD. That is a different mechanism of healing in MDMA therapy. We're not steering it towards mystical experiences. We're steering it towards whatever is emerging. We support that. You need kind of an intact ego to talk about the traumas that happened in your life. That may explain why the mystical experience, it's important. It happens in a fair number of people with MDMA, but it's not the key to therapeutic outcome, as it does seem to be linked to the therapeutic outcome from all the classic psychedelics.
Rick, we have a group of people who have devoted our commitment to psilocybin science and experience, as I was saying, that the first Spanish platform focuses on bridging the gap between science of psilocybin and the Spanish audience. What's your take and personal experience on psilocybin? And what are your predictions on the adoption of psilocybin as a medical and therapeutical tool?
Yeah, I think psilocybin has tremendous therapeutic potential. I've had very important experiences with psilocybin recently, some and some longer ago. I think that, again, what we're talking about is psychedelic medicine, where we want psychedelic therapists of the future to have access to psilocybin, to MDMA, to LSD, to ibogaine, to ketamine, all of this. I think that psilocybin is shorter acting than LSD. It's more embodied. I think it's a little bit easier than LSD, but I would personally add that I prefer LSD to psilocybin. And so
Why?
I think that it's a little bit harder to run away from things with LSD. It's a little bit more like overwhelming in certain ways. Your defenses are more overwhelmed. So if I were on a deserted island and I could only have one drug, most people think it would be, I'd take MDMA, but it would be LSD, because you might learn things you don't necessarily want to know, but it would be good for you. So it's kind of difficult medicine in some ways. It requires a lot of courage and change. Um, but I do think that the psilocybin will be a couple years behind MDMA, but it will be approved and it will have wide uses. I think people will in the future combine MDMA with psilocybin at the same time in different ways. Some psilocybin first, then MDMA, some MDMA first, then psilocybin. Similar with LSD, similar with the 5-MeO DMT and all these other substances. We will explore combinations, but I think the ego dissolution of the psilocybin is really valuable, as well as the sort of ego strengthening self-acceptance and love from MDMA. And so they're kind of complementary, and they should all be in the tool chest. And we hope that the work we do with MDMA really makes it easier for the work with psilocybin to become approved as well.
Rick, what's been your most meaningful experience so far?
Oh my gosh. It's hard to say that there's one most meaningful experience of all of them. I've done LSD over 100 times. I've done MDMA, as I said, about 130 times. I've done a whole bunch of other psychedelics as well. But there is one that, here's a good one. There's so many, but I'll say that when I turned 21, my girlfriend I had a girlfriend, but she was away. So I was all by myself. And so I decided that I would take LSD and spend my 21st birthday by myself doing LSD. And this was in the olden days, 1974, when there was records and record players and stuff. And so I had decided that I would put some music on, and in the old days, you would stack a bunch of records on top of each other, and then one would play to the end, and then the next one would come down, but there'd be some time between the records. So this first, so I'm doing LSD. At the time, LSD was, around 250 micrograms was the normal dose. It was a heavy dose. Major psychedelic experience where there's periods of time you're not verbal. And so I was listening to the music, and I should say that my girlfriend's father was in World War II. He was involved in the planes. He was in the group that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And he might have been in the third plane if there had been a third bomb. Also, this was in Sarasota, Florida, and an hour north is Tampa, Florida. That's the U.S. Sort of war. It's the second Pentagon, in a sense, where they run, the wars out of there, and they have underground bunkers with planes with nuclear weapons. So, all right. So I've just been thinking about this kind of thing, and so there was. There was a record that played, it ended, and then there was quiet, and for a while, and then I started hearing what I thought was like an air raid siren, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is not the time of day for an air raid siren. This is, I just can't understand it." And I said, "This must be it. This is the end of the world. They're dropping the bomb. The Russians are, we're having a war, and they're dropping the bomb on Tampa." And so I thought, what a tragedy. I'm just turning 21, and now my life is in front of me, but now the world's going to end. And so I thought, okay, I only have a few more minutes to live. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk outside, and I'm going to walk in the direction of Tampa. So when the bomb goes off and everything, I'm not hiding and running away. I'm seeing it all. I'm living as much of my life as I can in the next few minutes. So I walk out the door. I was at the end, I was at a dead end street. I was at the end of a dead end street. So I'm walking to the main street where I can see the Tampa better. And as I'm out the door, I am just awed by all of the beautiful sounds of the birds, and it's just I'm trying to live as much as I can. So I'm just taking in the sounds of nature, And then the various shades of green. This is in Florida, and it's beautiful, and it's just, so lush. And then the clouds are beautiful, and the blue sky and the white clouds and everything. I'm just like enjoying nature. I'm just living to this massive intake of information, and it was so joyous. And I felt like, wow, I am seeing the majesty of the world that normally you walk through because you're on business. You have to do this, you have to do that. So I was just overwhelmed with the beauty and complexity of the world and how wonderful that it was and how rich that was. And so I'm walking towards where I think is my destruction. The bombs are going to land, but I'm feeling delightful, happy. I mean, like, this is such a privilege that under the influence of LSD, I'm seeing all this and I'm taking it all in. And then all of a sudden, the air raid siren starts, and I start hearing a guitar sound. And then I hear drums. And then I'm like, oh my God, I am so stupid. That was the music that I put on. I'd forgotten that the other album had a sound like that. I'd completely forgotten. And so then I'm feeling like, man, I am so stupid to have like leaped to this idea. I'm going to die. The world is ending. But then with the pressure of that, my awareness kind of condensed a little bit. So I was relieved. I was happy I wasn't going to die. But the volume of information, the incredible complexity of what I was taking in was diminished. And so what I say that I learned from that is that the awareness of death combined with psychedelics can help you appreciate life in a way that you don't normally do, that is magical, mystical, beautiful, joyous. And so that has sort of been, now I just turned recently 69, but that was an experience of consciousness that I had at 21 that alerted me to just the magnitude of the power of psychedelics combined with the awareness of death, but not freaking out about death. And so that's been kind of a touchstone for me of all my psychedelic experiences, was that, on the one hand, how stupid I was to leap to thinking I'm dying. But on the other hand, what I learned from that has endured with me this whole time.
Rick, we're gonna jump into the almost the last part of the interview, which I call not the rapid fire questions, which is the last, but the short and sweet questions.
Okay.
So, what's been your most effective skill for this world? What is your most effective skill for this world we live in, and why?
Patience, because when I started this, in 1972, it was after the backlash of psychedelics. And I thought, okay, I'll be an underground psychedelic therapist. I will devote my life to psychedelics. I'll try to bring back psychedelic research. But I really, didn't know if it ever would work. And, now it's 51 years later, and there's lots of times that I could have been discouraged. I could have given up. But this idea of patience, and one thing I've said that some other people have liked is I said, patience is the fastest way. You push things too fast, or and then you get a backlash. So being slow, patient, gradual can actually be the fastest way to get things done. And I think enjoying little successes, like if I would have a conversation one day with somebody that had misconceptions about psychedelics, but then relaxed and said, oh, okay, maybe, one dose doesn't cause terrible brain damage. I would say, okay, that's a success enough for today. So, because it's taken forever and it's taken massive amounts of money, and we're still year and a half away, we think, from FDA approval. But I think patience and seeing that seeds that are planted 20, 30 years later can come around. And I'll give you one example. I know these are not short responses.
That's what we find.
Okay, but, now that it looks like we might actually have the data to persuade the FDA to make this into a medicine, the question is, what medicine should it be made into? I mean, what schedule? What schedule should it be? Should it be the most restrictive? It has to come out of Schedule 1. And so we're having to negotiate. This is, okay.
No probs.
Okay. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Rick. How you doing?
Good. I'm just finishing up a podcast Nice. Can you call me when you're done? Is it before 3:30? It should be before 3:30. Yeah, definitely. Okay, please. I'd love to just catch up on something, just set the plate for the week. Yeah. Because it's a bunch of interesting stuff. Great. Call me. That's well. Bye. Okay. Bye. All right. All right. So what I was saying is that we're needing to figure out about rescheduling. There's a woman who's working on a book about MDMA, and she wanted to interview the early people from the DEA that made MDMA illegal. And so I said, okay, I can maybe help you find them. I know who they are. The first one that was in charge from the DEA headquarters, Gene Hayslip, he's dead. He's no longer alive. The second one was the one that went to all the different hearings that I got to know pretty well. His name was Frank Sapienza. He acknowledged that when the DEA first moved to criminalize MDMA, all they knew about was ecstasy. They didn't know about the therapeutic use of MDMA. They just knew about ecstasy. And so he wasn't out to kill the therapeutic use. So I didn't demonize him. We kind of had a good relationship. And so I did a little Google search, and it turns out he's still alive. And not only is he still alive, but he consults with pharma companies to help them reschedule drugs. He's no longer working full-time for the DEA. So I wrote him a letter on LinkedIn, and I said, we haven't talked in over 35 years. You've been involved in this area, but when we were on opposite sides of this lawsuit, I knew that you weren't trying to kill the therapeutic use. We kind of had a good relationship. I said, we've made all this progress now, and we need some help to negotiate with the DEA about rescheduling MDMA. Would you be open to joining our team? And would you be open to being interviewed by this woman for her book? And so I sent him a message on LinkedIn, and the very next day, he wrote me back and he said, I remember you, I remember everything, and I will work with you and your team to try to help you reschedule MDMA as a medicine. And so it was just incredible. So what I mean by patience is that we had this reasonable relationship, even though I was suing him and he was trying to defend and doing DEA what they wanted to do. And in the end, they won. But I didn't demonize him. And now, all these years later, that relationship, the seeds that were planted then, are going to help us make it into a medicine. So,
what a beautiful story. Thanks for sharing. Can you name your set of everyday essential habits to thrive in, to be on your center?
Work, basically. Work, it's the way to create the world that I want to create. So I tend to work on weekends, and so work is part of my habit. Laughter, trying to find the joy in different things and in moments. It's one of the things I love about my wife, is that she's laughs at about a bunch of stuff. I'd say, I wouldn't say essential, but I like to smoke marijuana and think about things. I do a lot of work. I like to edit what I write when I'm high on marijuana. I don't meditate. I think I sort of meditate on marijuana or just thinking about things. So meditation is not one of my essential habits. I think sleeping and dreaming, I try to, if I can, do that enough. That's big. I think, just trying to feel generous, trying to feel love, trying to feel, hopeful, is a good habit. But I try to not be trapped by habits. And so the same disrupt everything. I try to disrupt habits as well. And, I'm right-handed, but occasionally I try to do stuff with my left hand just to kind of build up my offside. So I'd say that, the habits are celebrating life. I mean, I just have had prostate cancer and caught it early and had the operation, and it's all gone. But life could end at any second. So it's to sort of recognize that. And so, I'd say a good balance between the conscious and the unconscious. So much goes by, but deepening it, resting, breathing, sleeping, getting high.
Is any other book that have influenced you as the way it influenced the two books that you shared previously with us?
Yeah. There's a book by Aldous Huxley called Island. And we see the movie Avatar, and it's about this sort of paradise island, and then it's destroyed by people who want to come and mine it for certain kind of minerals. The book Island by Huxley, which he wrote as the last book in his life, it's about this paradise, idyllic society with psychedelics woven through it. It's a beautiful book, but while he was writing it, it ended in a different way, where he has it end with the destruction of the island by the oil companies. So the lesson from that is that there is no private utopias anymore. In a world of nuclear weapons, in a world of global warming, you could go to Tahiti, let's say, and set up a little paradise there, but it's going to be threatened by the rest of the world. So I would say that what that means to me, and what I learned from Island, also Hermann Hesse wrote this book, The Glass Bead Game, Magister Ludi, The Glass Bead Game, and he helped win the Nobel Prize for that. And Hermann Hesse, wrote Journey to the East, Siddhartha, a bunch of books, phenomenal. But again, it's a post-apocalyptic world, and they've developed a way to channel people's aggressions into this game, and it's a game of music and poetry and mathematics to try to say the most beautiful expression of life and consciousness. But in the end, it gets so abstract that it's away from the common people. It doesn't channel these destructive energies anymore. So both of those books, The Glass Bead Game by Hermann Hesse and Island by Huxley, have the message that we need to go to the heart of the system. We need to have mass mental health, spiritualized humanity, that you can have isolated places where you gather strength, but you need to go to the core of the system, and we need to have everybody evolve, and that there is no private utopias, that they will not survive anymore.
What will be Rick's Doblin best practices for optimal mental health?
Using psychedelics through the lifespan, and trying to be in love and act in a loving way. And I think one of the good things is that it doesn't need to be reciprocal. You can love somebody that doesn't love you back. Why stop being loving? So I think that kind of gratitude and graciousness for what we've been given, gratitude. Brother David Steindl-Rast says, gratitude is the heart of prayer. A beautiful book that he wrote. So being grateful, being appreciative, being grateful, and trying to have little moments of joy and love.
What's Rick's Doblin mission in 2023 and beyond, and what's the role of MAPS in today's world?
I'd say right now my biggest mission is to try to raise the rest of the money we need from philanthropists and donors rather than investors, to keep public benefit number one over private profit in bringing MDMA to the world. That's the top goal. It'll be really hard to accomplish, but we shall see. And then, ideally, long term, I'd like to be a psychedelic therapist, legal psychedelic therapist, above ground with, everything approved, and that would be tremendous.
Recommendations for someone looking to reconnect with themselves?
Deep breathing, just settle in. I think find an MDMA therapist would be a great way to start. I think that opens you up, to help you process things. It sort of grounds you for further work with classic psychedelics. But I would say that whatever makes sense to you. I mean, it can be through dreams, it can be through creative writing, it can be through art. But I have found that psychedelics have had a major role in my happiness, my evolution, my learnings. And so if you really want to reconnect with yourself, I would say sort of a therapeutic MDMA experience would be something to try to arrange.
And any recommendation where people can look for these MDMA therapists?
Well, it's only underground unless it's in research, and so it's hard to find. But I think that people can do a lot on themselves. The treatment manual, which describes our therapeutic approach, is available for free on our website. It's around 80 pages. So it's the treatment manual, and you can learn how we try to teach therapists to do therapy. And so I'd recommend people read the treatment manual, and be wary of what you find, because it might not be pure, it might not be something different. But again, I don't want to say that people should do this. What I think is people should make up their own minds. People should do what seems right to them. So I'm not telling them to do it or not to do it, but I am suggesting that for me, it's been a tremendous benefit. And I think for many people, an MDMA experience to start this inner voyage would be a great way. And I also think that when we do this study with adolescents, 12 to 17-year-olds with PTSD, we will see that these substances can be valuable throughout the lifespan.
We'll make sure we put the link of the treatment manual in the show notes.
Great.
Rick, where can people learn more about current scientific studies into the therapeutic benefits of psychedelics?
Well, first off, they could go to clinicaltrials.gov. So clinicaltrials.gov is a website that has all of the research that's going on in much of the world. And so you can put in MDMA or psilocybin or LSD, and you'll see all the studies that are going. I think learning a lot about this, reading The Way of the Psychonaut by Stan Grof, who we talked about before, but also there's more and more in scientific journals. I think there's a lot in microdosing that people could learn a lot about, enormous amount about. I mean, come to the conference, come to the Psychedelic Science Conference, and you'll have just an enormous number of speakers and talks to choose from to learn just the incredible richness of modern psychedelic research.
Last question, and we jump into the rapid fire questions, which are very, very quick. What psychedelics applications you find most promising?
Well, MDMA for PTSD, I think, is tremendously promising. MDMA for substance use. Ben Sessa did a study in England with MDMA for alcohol use disorder. Couples therapy for MDMA, I think, is one of the best uses of MDMA. People facing death. Psychedelics are great for people who are dealing with the confrontation with death. I think social anxiety, MDMA can be tremendously helpful for social anxiety. I think there's so many applications, but deepening one's meditation practice. There's a great movie I'll recommend called Descending the Mountain. Descending the Mountain. And it's about a research project in Switzerland with lifelong Zen meditators who went to the University of Zurich for a brain scan before they go to a meditation retreat. And in the middle of the meditation retreat, like a 6-day meditation retreat, everybody gets a placebo or a psilocybin. And they were told to meditate through that. And then at the end, they go back to have brain scans. They have long-term follow-ups. And it turns out that there's brain changes. It helps them deepen their meditation practice. From this, lifelong meditators, you still kind of get channeled, and a deep psilocybin experience can help deepen one's meditation practice. I think celebration, we need more celebrations in our lives. So psychedelics are great for celebratory experiences if you're open to whatever comes up. But I do think trauma, the healing of trauma, is one of the best. And that's why we've chosen MDMA for PTSD. And that's why we're ahead of everybody, and because it's such a good fit.
Rick, we're jumping in the rapid fire questions. Your favorite documentary?
Oh my God, my favorite documentary. Oh my God. Well, let me see. I can't think of one right now. They asked me some others, and I'll think of that in the background.
Yes. The best playlist you listen to?
One that my wife has made for MDMA experiences.
Ideal food daily menu?
I like a cream of wheat in the morning from the whole grain with bananas and raisins and cinnamon and chocolate chips.
Ideal psychedelic yearly plan, which means what would you take in an ideal world? What will be your ideal take of psychedelics in a year?
Oh, in a year. Well, it depends. I'm so busy that I don't have enough time to do psychedelics. So, I think, a couple MDMA experiences, some, major psychedelic experience, bunches of marijuana, um, but always, not, by not trying to have a pattern of smoking every day or, just when the time is right. And so I think the mixture of all those things would be good for a year.
Sorry, I interrupt you.
Oh, I was just going to say that I think it changes over a lifetime, but there's different reasons at different times throughout the course of a life.
Best resource you can recommend?
Way of the Psychonaut by Stan Groff.
And the most useful gadget for you?
The most useful
Gadget?
gadget. Oh, well, my phone. Steve Jobs, who did LSD, he said that it was one of the most important experiences of his life. He started Apple Computer, and so I think my phone is the most useful gadget.
So, you have any thought about your favorite documentary?
Well, I'll say that there was one that I was watching last night. My favorite documentary. God.
Or the one you were listening?
Oh, okay.
Or you
Well, I'll
were
say How to
watching?
Change Your Mind. How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan.
Michael Pollan.
And that's on Netflix. And episode number 3 is about MAPS and MDMA. But it's a really good documentary. It's changed a lot of people's minds. It's recent. And
It's opening gates, opening doors, yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, I'll mention there is one book called Acid Test, LSD, Ecstasy, and the Power to Heal. And that's recently come out in a new edition, but that's about our research with MDMA for PTSD. So if anybody, Acid Test, LSD, Ecstasy, and the Power to Heal by Tom Schroeder, Schroder. And that's a great book to learn about MDMA for PTSD.
We'll make sure also we include it in the show notes. What will be the message for anyone listening this podcast and watching this video interview? Your last message, your parting thoughts.
Be hopeful. Be hopeful. There's a lot of opportunities ahead for altering the trajectory that the world is on, which seems to be heading in a pretty disruptive, negative way, but there's lots of opportunities to steer it in a good direction. Buckminster Fuller calls it trim tabs, little things that you can do that over time have a big impact. Trim tabs like the rudder, a small rudder on an ocean liner. It takes a long time to turn, but if you start a little bit, you can do that with less pressure. So I'd say the best message is hope and optimism that humans will wise up in time.
Rick, is there anything else you want to add?
I think that's it. I love your questions. This is really good.
Thank you so much. Where people can find you in the internet?
Maps.org. And so, ask Maps. You can get messages to me that way.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom, for the work you do. I like to finish with a quote also from the...
Before you do that, I'll just say one thing, that there is something I'm hoping to do in Spain, which we haven't mentioned at all, which is please. That there are, one of our projects is Israelis and Palestinians that are doing ayahuasca and MDMA together. So we talked about MDMA for couples therapy, but for people that are just engaged in this conflict, and there's all sorts of conflicts like this around the world, to see their common humanity is helpful. So we're trying to do a research project. Lior Roseman at University Imperial College in London has done the work with ayahuasca. And so he's looked at interviews with Israelis and Palestinians doing ayahuasca and MDMA together. He took a group to Spain for an ayahuasca experience with pre and post measures. We're now working with the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, where they have the world's largest academic program on conflict resolution. And so what we're hoping to do is to bring Israelis and Palestinians to Spain for a group MDMA experience with measures before and after. So it's one, again, of these more optimistic things. It's planting small seeds, but in Spain, I think we might be able to do permission for a group session in a way that might take us more years to get to from the FDA. So that's I just wanted to mention that's a big
Anything
part.
we can support and empower, count on us. Count on us, our community, and everything around us, for sure.
Okay.
Rick, I'd love to finish with a sentence or a quote that says, if we recognize the power of entheogenic substances to open us to the universal truth and full dimension of human experience, and if we accept the role of the shaman as hierophant and psychopomp into this realm, as enacted, for example, of the Yuichol Man Sakame, we have to conclude that today in Western society, we are deprived of the two key resources for complete human growth. Young people in their hunger for meaning will still gravitate towards entheogens. The more experienced among us might try to ease their journey, but in the absence of qualified guides, not all will benefit from their experience. So that's raising awareness about psychedelics and about a most hopeful humanity. Rick, thanks for disrupting everything, for disrupting yourself, for disrupting your habits, and also disrupting the world of psychedelics.
Yeah.
Thanks for this time, and thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for helping us continue this conversation with more people.
And thank anyone who's watching and listening to this podcast. Hope you can take at least one thing and take it into action about everything that Rick shared with us today. And remember that if you don't disrupt yourself, you will be disrupted anyway. So jump ahead and create a movement.